what I'm going to share today is a sort of a basic template that we've put together that will be available for teams to take and adapt and use in their own workspaces. So as you'd expect, like most of these sorts of things, we've created it or put it together within a process within Skore. We've tried to, what we've aimed to do, like everything, is to keep it really, really simple. So not to overwhelm people with lots of information. We've put it together like a sort of landing page style, but mainly using sort of native features and functionality in the product. Now, I'm just going to very briefly take you through the different sections that we've got here. Obviously, we've got a set of useful links that are more around the sort of training and use of the product for people to access. But the sections themselves are kind of, so we've called it process standards and guidelines, and that's to kind of create that idea behind, if you like, the idea of standards are things that you must do, and guidelines are things that we recommend, but are a bit more flexible in terms of how they get applied. So you'll see we've got some process mapping standards. I'll go into that in a second. We've also got process library standards. So again, by that, what I mean is process mapping standards is all about what the processes look like, how the processes are constructed, and the process library standards are more around the sort of naming conventions and how you set up folders within the workspace and those sorts of things. Best practices then again is that sort of idea of guidelines. So the things that we sort of recommend that you do rather than that you must do. You'll see in a second all of the stuff in here is we've kept it very simple, so there's not loads and loads of information, so that it's got all the basics so that you can then adapt it, you can add to it easily without overwhelming people. Now, the other thing that I've got here, and we have shared this in a number of our other resources or similar versions of this in our resources previously, but again, it's always worth sharing these things again. I have put in what I call the process of process improvement. And again, this is driven by some of the challenges that we see teams face when using or certainly embarking with Skore at the beginning of projects, especially when they're looking to sort of build a library of processes out within the organization. And this basically, it's quite simple, but it goes through the sort of key steps of how you'd use Skore in this context. So we've got we start from the idea that the processes that we want to put in the library are undocumented, or the documentation that you do have is so out of date that actually you need to start again and capturing the processes. I suppose you could also feed in here is sort of partially captured processes that actually just need more detail as well. But one of the things that when we're training teams up initially, one of the things that can get quite confusing for people is trying to do too much at once. And we've seen this on a number of projects in recent months where people will embark on capturing processes and then they want to go and apply all the analysis and improvements all in one go. And that can actually be quite overwhelming, not only for the analysts who are doing the process documentation, but also for the people involved in the process improvement project. So we've really just in this process we tried to separate out the steps for standardizing process is all about just getting that documentation done initially. Identifying the wasted time, effort, and cost is about how you do your analysis to identify the opportunities, and then planning and removing the waste is now we've identified those opportunities, let's put a plan together to actually go and improve, update, change, and fix the processes. And then we've got a piece about continuous improvement at the beginning. I'm just going to sort of quickly go into the standardized processes. Now, this is all stuff I'm sure you all know around how you go about setting this up, defining the scope of the process, identifying who the process owner is, the subject matter experts, stakeholders, and so on. But here, when we talk about applying the standards, really ideally it's around this point at the end of this initial documentation of the process. So it will depend on your organization. Do you want to do this before you approve and publish the process? Ideally, you would do it as part of that activity, is making sure that the process that's been captured conforms to the standards. So that's the real reason that this is in the documentation. This process improvement is to help with the context of when and you'd use the standards. There are a few attachments that reference some of the different resources that are available as well within the process, but they're also referenced in other parts of the map. So I'll just dip into each of these sections. As I said, they're all quite simple, but process mapping standards, most of you should recognize most of these. I've numbered them again just to make them easy to reference, but it's things like the process must have a clearly defined purpose, and we're starting to use the language of value as well. So when you talk about the purpose, it's about thinking about who the customer is of this process and what do they value in that process, because when it comes to actually doing analysis and improvements, if you're not clear on what is valuable to who the customer is and what's valuable to them, you can often end up trying to identify improvements from the wrong perspective. Like you might be making the process faster, for example, but that might be actually having a negative impact on the quality that the customer's getting, for example. So that's quite important. Making sure you've got an owner. When you define the activities in a process in your what box, is describing them as activities using a verb and a noun. Processes should or activities should have at least one input and output. The standard things that we talk about within the training. And as I said, we've only got 7 sort of key standards in this here, which allows for lots and lots of flexibility. So again, if you were doing, as James was talking about in his team, that you're doing sort of customer journey mapping, but Keith's team are doing a sort of the more traditional process mapping, you might have a sort of slightly different set of standards that you apply for each of those. If I come back up to the top again, so I talked about the process library standards. So in a similar sort of way, just list out the sort of key process and document naming conventions. The reason we use the term process and document naming here is something that there's a new feature coming in Skore. Will be coming out in the next month or so, which is the ability to create documents within the workspace as well and interlink them with processes. So when I say documents, it could be things like standard operating procedures, policies. Instead of having them documented in Word documents and stored in other places, you could actually document them directly within Skore and interlink them with the processes. So that's why we've used the process and document naming. Again, repeating the process owner here, but things like process access rights, folder names, when should you pin a process within the workspace, when should you use tags, and there could be other things. You could also start to include things in here like forms and custom fields, but I've deliberately not put them in the default here because again we don't know, everyone's using them in slightly different ways, so we sort of keep it quite simple. And then if I go back up to the top again, the last section on there is the best practices piece. So it goes back to what I was saying before. The way I've sort of the way we've constructed this is to think about standards are things that you must conform with, and then the best practices are the sort of recommendations. And this is really broken down into 2 sections. So there's the process mapping piece. I've just laid it out on the left, and it's if you're familiar with our 5 steps to the perfect process, which is there's a PDF available that user can click on and download from there. It's our standard 5 steps that we use in our training. So how do you map a process? Define the title and scope, define the activities, define the outputs, define the who, and then add any additional information. It's that standard sort of iterative approach to mapping a process. And then on the right hand side here, we've put the sort of look and feel guidelines. And again, I've kept this dead simple, but can create some interesting debates. I've again kept this quite open. So I talked about readability. So we always recommend when using Skore, when you map a process, that you keep processes readable on the screen. So you think about typically using a standard computer screen. You want to be able to see everything on a process diagram on one screen at one time, rather than having to scroll around either up and down or left to right. Because it just makes it easier for people to quickly understand, but it also starts to force you to create processes in digestible chunks. So using the detailed views more often to break the processes down into different sections. Now, I know that not everybody agrees with that approach. James, I'm guessing you guys kind of map in quite long processes. I know some of Keith's processes are laid out like that. So, it's our recommendation, but, you may have a good use case for doing it in a different way. But again, we like to use it as a guideline, because I've seen some really good examples of, when it is a good idea to create a process in a big, long, like top to bottom flow or a left to right flow. So we recommend doing it this way, but we will accept different ways of doing it, hence why it's a guideline. And so we included things like icons and colors and styles in there as well. But as I said, it's really just a basis for teams to build on and build their own styles and guidelines and standards into this. So I mean, that's it. I've tried to keep it very simple. A simple structure for people to take and build on and work with in the future. And this is available, so if you want a copy of it in the workspace, then let us know and we can provide it. So that's another new feature that we've got coming into the product is a glossary. So being able to sort of capture all of those acronyms and abbreviations that people use all the time.
TLAs.
TLA. No, the things that no one can remember what they are. So the ability to build that into your processes as well at the same time to make it much easier for people. Will be coming up. I think that's the session next week, but we'll be publishing that and sharing it early next week to let you know.